Hello, my name is Kai, and I am a bit of a rambler, and I want to talk about India again. Oh, wait. I like to travel, learn, and tell stories. And I want to talk about India again. Part 3. India, that stuff I didn't fit into the first or second episode. There's a bunch. Yeah, this is going to be the smaller things and some larger things without a specific theme. There was a monkey wall. Good place to start. I rode my bike into town to get dinner or around town to explore, but very close, one of the first properties I would have to ride my bike by, after 5 minutes, there was this long wall and there were pretty large monkeys sitting on it, like 20 of them. They lived in the trees around there, I guess, and every evening at like 5 p.m., I'd ride my bike, and all 20 of them would just watch me ride my bike past them. And I always said hello, and they never tried to grab my food or jump on me or anything. But they were large. They were larger than regular monkeys that I was used to seeing in a zoo. They looked like half human-sized. They looked like pretty big. But never aggressive. They were always super tame, and I bet a bunch of people fed them all the time, because Indian people loved animals, and they feed all the animals around them. Maybe that's why all the animals are so cool. Actually, that's funny. I just thought of that. I don't have this written down, but that reminds me of when I told all my hosts of that house, they came over, and I mentioned that all the dogs in India were so chill. Like in Thailand, they all bark at you and eat you. But here, I usually walk around at night and there's dogs everywhere. And one of them, oh man, I can't remember his name. Oh, I hung out with that guy probably the most. He was sort of an indirect on-call guy in case I needed any help. But anyway, he asked me, "Oh no, why did you go out there? It's very dangerous, the dogs." And I was like, no, they're fine. They lay or they look up at me, but then go back to sleep. Like I was saying, they're all very chill here. And him and the main owner of the house looked at each other, like with worried glances. And the owner was like, "No, the dogs here are pretty dangerous at night. They all bark." But I don't know, man. In India, they were super chill with me. And these monkeys were super chill with me also. I don't know. But that was great because it was really cool to see these giant monkeys sitting on a wall every day and say hello to them. And it was nice to see all the dogs every evening without getting eaten like I do in Thailand. I was riding my bike into the city to go see Durga Puja, which I have to tell you about the statues for that because that's insane. But while I was riding my bike there, I was at an intersection and the light turned green and everyone revved, but the guy on a motorized scooter behind me actually accelerated just enough that his motor scooter bounced up real quick and his handlebar locked into my handlebar on my regular bicycle, but he was still going. And for a few seconds there, I was accelerating with this guy down the street who was like, "Oh, I'll just bump into him and keep going." But he didn't. We were locked together somehow, his handle and mine, and I got this extra burst of speed across the intersection, but just for a few seconds, and then we both were like, "Whoa," and I didn't move, so I stayed balanced, but he, slowed down, and then it disentangled the two handlebars, and he said sorry in perfect English, and then drove away. But that was pretty crazy, because I was riding my bicycle, and then light turns green, and all of a sudden I have no control over my bicycle. You know what? That's what I would like to talk about. Durga Puja and Deepavali and the other 100 literal holidays they have in India. There are so many holidays in India. There was a holiday going on pretty much the entire time I was there. I think there was a section of 4 days where there wasn't. But between Durga Puja, the Festival of Lights, and then Deepavali, which is the festival of the goodest goddess beating the bad devilish god in a battle, there were, and then the other ones that I don't even know the name of anymore, I just couldn't believe it because there were constant celebrations. People singing, people dancing in the streets, stages being set up. Like, Indians love live music and live singing and live dancing, and they love live events and weddings in public spaces, and they love playing music and dancing to it in public, which is super cool because whenever there's a break for an Indian musical part of a movie, I'm into it. So that's what living in India was like. Like, there were stages set up for Durga Puja and Deepavali. Or Durga Puja, I think. The goddess's name is Durga. That's why it's the Durga Puja. It's her thing. There are 33,333 gods officially in the Hindu religion. And everyone knows the big ones and then a whole bunch of the lesser ones, but nobody knows all 33,000 of them, according to the Indians I talked to. But they know a lot of them, and a lot of them have holidays. That's why, and those holidays aren't one day. Those holidays last 2 weeks. Like, the Durga Puja is like 2 weeks long, and Deepavali is several days. So 33,000 gods, even if 50 of them have a week, there goes the year. So it's pretty awesome because there's constant celebrations. But the thing that impressed me the most technically was the statues. They are crazy, and I couldn't believe how these statues were constructed. Okay, I gotta tell you about these. So for every single one of those holidays that I'm mentioning, there are statue artisans, and they get clay from the river, red clay, and they build a life-size statue, often a life-size statue, sometimes a smaller to scale statue. The smallest one I've ever seen is like 1.5 feet high, but most of them are life-sized 6 foot or taller god statues. And so they build it all out of this red clay over several days. And each day the clay dries a little bit, and they go back and they add on the finer details of fingernails. And yeah, like, these statues are crafted down to the fingernails. Incredibly detailed faces and features and body articulations. And they'll be leaning forward, holding, with a spear. So they have to make that fist hold so it's ready for the spear prop that they put in there after the statue will be complete. So it's an incredibly intensive creation process. So they get the mud, craft it, add in all the fine details over like 3 or 4 days usually. And like, Durga Puja is 2 weeks, but there's one like main day that everything should be set up by. And so they're building these, and it's not just one, they don't build one statue of Durga. They'll build Durga and the guy she's defeating and his henchmen and his pets and some demons in the background. So there's like 8 statues or 4 statues life-sized in these dioramas, these giant scenes. And after everyone is built and all the details are added in to the clay and it's dried, so it's, it's there, it's ready to go, they paint it. And in detail, they paint every single aspect of the statue with like bright blue for the skin of the bad guy, I'm pretty sure it was, and just extremely detailed, somewhat realistic paintings, like pretty realistic painting, to be honest. And there's shading and different colors where the light would bounce off the skin. Like, it's very impressively detailed painting of these statues. And then after they paint it, they dress it up in robes and jewelry, tons of jewelry and costumes, and they put shoes, and then they put in the weapons. Like I said, one's holding a spear, so they slide the spear in, and all of these, so many, everything you would put on a real person or a real warrior in the medieval times or the magical Hindu text times. Like, whatever you would consider a legendary hero to be wearing in an epic quest in the Bhagavad Gita. That's what these guys are wearing. That's what these statues are wearing. So they spend a lot of time making this crazy, amazing scene after they've painted everything and dress everybody up in costumes and put on all the props. And then after that, they'll display them and build a pavilion around the statue scene that they've set up. So it's in like a shrine, temple, mini temple area that they've built. And usually there's music, some speakers there, and they're playing some traditional celebration music with it. And that's not one per neighborhood, or that's not one statue per city or whatever town. There are hundreds and hundreds of these statues called pandals, the diorama scene. Wait, no, that's not a pandal. Pandal is the light board, the celebratory light board for Durga, I think, for Durga Puja. So I don't know what they're called. Those huge scenes where they make the statues, though, are insane, and there are at least hundreds of them all around the city. I would not be surprised at all if there are thousands. There are so many. And on the main day, everyone goes around. There's a bigger celebration than usual, even though every day is a celebration in India. And they carry on a palanquin the statues. So they carry the main goddess statue through the streets like a giant statue. There will be a few main ones, and they'll carry those biggest ones into temples where they'll sit and preside over the festivities of the day. And then the day after the holiday is over, this is what's crazy to me. They take out these incredibly detailed, intricate, glazed statues, and they'll carry the statues, all of them, all thousands, not just the big ones here. They carry all the statues to the river and place them in the river, and then the red clay and paint washes away back into the riverbank, and the gods go back to the earth. And then 2 weeks later, it's another holiday, and the artisans make another set of statues and another whole scene that they make the details out of, and then they dress up, and then they build this tiny temple for anew, and then start playing music, and then after it's over, they take it to the river and it goes down, and then they do it again 2 weeks later, or 1 or 3 days later, the next day sometimes, because they have so many holidays and so many gods and goddesses. So you have artisans that the whole year, that's what they do. They build statues their whole life. And that's probably why they're so good at it, and these statues look so unbelievably realistic, because these guys are making statues their whole lives. Every 2 weeks, they're building a new one. But it's a fascinating process. It's really cool to watch. They'll have like dance troops next to the palanquin they're carrying the people on, dancing, and they don't sprint to the river so they can dump it and start on the next statue. They'll take hours walking from the city to the river. It's a fascinating thing to watch, and the music's good. I like Indian music a lot, and the dancing is pretty cool, and that I'm still in awe over the amount of work they put into every single holiday and how reverent they are toward these idols that they build, these statues, and how large the statues are, and how intricately they're dressed up and adorned and positioned and carved and shaped. It's just amazing. And then they wash away into the river, and then they make a new one, and they do that constantly. It's absolutely fascinating. So for any holiday that was going on, which was constantly, I would ride my bike around and just try to see as many of those goddess and god scenes as I could. And man, I saw so many. And they were all extremely impressive just because of the craft work that went into them all and just the dedication. Like some of them were literally 20 minutes or more by a bicycle ride on an abandoned road with no houses, no farms or fields, nothing around, but someone took the time to go out there and build a small pop-up temple, and someone made those statues that they put in there to honor Durga or whatever goddess or god was going on at the time in the middle of nowhere, and there's even electricity hooked up and music playing. It's amazing the dedication they have to their goddesses and gods. It was so much fun riding around to each one, and that's what a lot of the people in the city do. They'll walk one temple to the next, but I was outside of this. I went to the city once, but it's just so crowded during the holidays that it's not very fun for me to ride around on the bike and look at everything. But because of their reverence and their joy of celebration in India, there were hundreds outside of the city that I could just ride my bike to town. Like, I rode for 2 hours in one direction on one road during one of the, not even the biggest day, during Deepavali, I think it was. It was one of the holidays. And every time there was a tiny town, there was at least one giant statue scene going on that had been built. And I just kept going, kept looking at all of them. And then I made my way back and saw more of them. It's so cool. It's such a cool tradition that is, I mean, the amount of work, the amount of craft hours they are putting into constructing these scenes that they return to the earth days later or a day later sometimes is unbelievable for me, honestly. Like, it's it's difficult for me to wrap my head around putting so much work into these creations that they know are temporary, into putting so much detail into a fingernail that they know is going to wash away in a couple days at most. But they do it constantly, all year. It's fascinating to see and very fun to talk about with. I talked about with a bunch of locals who would be happy to see me enjoying the festivities, and they'd just strike up a conversation and explain to me which goddess was which and what that weird alligator dog was. There's this cool alligator dog I really like. He's one of the demons, I guess. I love that part of the celebration. I also loved all the music and dancing, which was very common. There's a lot of Indians dancing, and it seems like such a part of the whole culture anyway. The state I was in, it seemed like everybody loved the live dancing and live music, and they have no problem playing recorded celebration music over speakers they hook up to the temples and whatever. But there's also a lot of live music that I would stop and listen to for a long time. I'd listen to a whole concert sometimes. Or sometimes I'd be getting dinner and there would just be a stage set up for no reason that I can tell. And I would just watch the music after I got my street food that I love. And the coolest one I probably saw, the one that really sticks out in my mind, similar to that statue in the middle of nowhere, I was in the middle of two towns. It was a 20-minute bike ride, at least, from between two towns. And right in the middle of those two towns, in the middle of an otherwise empty field, they had set up a stage, like a full stage, and there was electricity hooked up. There must have been an electricity pole around there somewhere, although I didn't see any. And there was an announcer, even, and it was some kind of exhibition, some kind of talent show, something, because it was all the local people. You could just tell they were from the local surrounding farms. They weren't from the city, and because this is not close to the city. This is farther out by 30 minutes than my house, which is 30 minutes outside the city already. But they were all dressed up, and they all slicked their hair back, or the ladies fluffed their hair. They were all dressed up very nicely and costumed very intricately, and one person after another went up and a song would start playing, and they would lip sync to the song while doing like really intricate dance moves, or modern dance moves too that you would see in like a musical, an Indian musical, a Bollywood musical. And it went on for hours. It was going on before I got there, and I stayed there for over an hour, and then it was still going on after I rode off. And it was just so cool seeing this huge community of people come together and just share their talent for dancing and their love of dancing with everybody else. Like, everybody's there with huge, wide grins. And when I showed up, everybody was like, oh, look, he likes it too. But it wasn't, they just looked at me and they were happy. And then we all watched these happy people dancing and lip syncing. And it was magical. It was such a cool experience to share with a bunch of locals in the middle of an otherwise empty field where they set up a giant stage, and dozens of people kept doing dances one after the other, just showing off their love of expression. It was wonderful. Yeah, lots of live performances in India, which is great because I do like live music a lot and live performances a lot, and there's always stuff going on. There are so many celebrations. Like, I was there during like the traditional wedding month also, and I probably saw 20 weddings. I probably walked by 20 different weddings while I was there. Almost every other day, there was just another wedding going on. Some weddings went on for a few days. They kept the thing up, and people just kept going there and celebrating the next day. People like to party in Bhubaneswar, I can tell you that. Popular party state. I had a great time there. Let's see, one of my neighbors brought over sweets called kakras, which are a brown sugar coconut honey dough balls that are very soft and chewy, but totally delicious. And his mom knew it was Durga Puja, or maybe it was Deepavali, and she said, here, go bring this to that weird foreigner. And he showed up with a Tupperware full of them, gave them to me, and I talked to him a couple sentences in English, and he said, bye, and then he left. And I ate all of them in like a minute because they were the perfect, delicious brown sugar donut holes. They were so tasty. Oh, the one bane that I had to change about my house when I was in India was that there was a doorbell connected, and it had this tweeting, whistling noise like a bird in the morning would make, but it played inside the house very loudly whenever someone rang the doorbell. And I had 2 gates. I had one gate right outside my front door, and then I had another gate that was the wall surrounding the house, the entryway into that. And I didn't lock the outer gate because I didn't want to unlock it every time I went out, and I went out at least once a day. I always exercise in the evening, and I go out to eat. But because I didn't lock the outer gate, the hired cleaner for that house, that house I rented had a cleaner who cleaned every day, but he spent a long time cleaning, and I like my own space. Like, I rent a whole house so that I don't have to share it with other people, and he would not stop coming over to the house to clean every day, but sometimes he would just come over and sit on the couch in the living room and use the Wi-Fi. Actually, that was more like 3 to 5 times a day. He'd come over and just use the Wi-Fi. And his phone doesn't have headphones or anything, so the phone's just playing loud videos. And after like the first few days, I realized that he wasn't doing anything. He was just hanging out because we had good Wi-Fi in the house. And I hadn't invited him over. He would just come over and push the doorbell over and over until I let him inside the house. Actually, to be perfectly honest, I didn't let him inside the house either. After he rang the bell like 20 times, and I knew it was him, I would open the door and say, "Hi, what do you need?" And he would not push past me, but he'd turn his body sideways and then slide in between me and the gap in the door frame that I had left open, like the 6 inches, and he'd just turn sideways and slide through me into the house. And then he'd point to the prayer shelf or say clean, and then sit down with his phone on the sofas. After he did the prayer shelf, he always did the prayer shelf every day. And I noticed that he put fresh flowers on the prayer shelf and lit an incense. So I'd have to pause some audio work that I was doing while he was in there. And after 20 or 30 minutes of him hanging out on the couch using the Wi-Fi, I was like, "Hey, I'm going to work now, so I'll see you later." And he would say, uh-huh, and then not move until I said thank you, and then went to the door and opened it up. Thank you, goodbye, and then he would get the hint. And then he would be back 2 hours later, or go up to the rooftop and just hang out up there, and I can't get any work done while either his phone is playing loud TikTok videos or if he's walking around on the roof. And everyone, the other owners and all the other helpers, they translated to him that he shouldn't disturb me during the day, the working hours I gave to them, and that after he worked, he should leave the house. And he said yes to all of them, but he kept doing the exact same thing. And ringing that doorbell. The doorbell doesn't go dong, it goes but like incredibly loudly, as if the bird was next to your ear. So this shrill whistling travels through the entire house every time the doorbell is rung. He was totally fine just hanging out because you could still get Wi-Fi signal. So sometimes he would just wait in front of my front door and ring the doorbell and then wait 5 minutes and ring it again. Or 2 minutes while he was checking his messages or TikTok or whatever in front of the house where he could get the Wi-Fi, and then ring the doorbell again, play another couple videos, ring the doorbell. And again, very specifically wanted a singular space. That's why I rented an entire home this time. So I had to start locking the doors to the house, and then he would just wait outside pushing the doorbell until I answered. And if I didn't, he would come back an hour later and start pushing it again. Until eventually I was like, all right, and I just disconnected the doorbell because I didn't want to lock the outer gate because then I'd have to unlock it. But then the cleaner started showing up and like calling my name from the door because he knew the doorbell wasn't working anymore. And I had to start locking the outer gate as well because I used Google Translate and I told him straight up, like, I need you to give me my space. Like, I don't need you to clean this house. I can clean it. It's okay. And like I said, he never wanted to use the Google Translate to talk, but I realized later it was maybe because he couldn't read. And one of the things he did when he cleaned it, he also brought in fresh flowers from the garden and then would light an incense stick. And I told him, I'm going to do this from now on. And I did. Every single day, I got fresh flowers from the garden and lit an incense stick to Durga or whoever. There was a bunch of pictures of the gods on a specific prayer table they had in the house. And I just did that for the rest of the time I was there because I really wanted my own space. I'm a pretty clean guest, so the house wasn't dirty, and there was a broom there anyway, so I could clean whenever I wanted. And it was cool. I got to do the prayer thing every day, and I did that every day for a couple months. And then I had some peace and quiet to plan out this podcast and audiobooks and whatever, watch stuff sometimes, whatever I wanted to do. I got the house to be separate, so I felt bad, but I kind of had to establish boundaries eventually so that I could get my own stuff done. Because if I didn't lock that outer door, he came by 10 times a day, easily. And he'd knock on the door and ring the bell for 20 minutes, and if I answered, he'd say something like, "It's Durga Puja." And I'd say, "Yeah." And then he'd walk away. and I'd have to have paused a recording or something and then get out there and listen to that and go back and then try and do it again. Then he'd be back in an hour. And he just wanted to hang out, but I didn't. After the first week or so, I had my stuff to do. I like doing my own stuff. When I was riding around, I saw these signs for hotels, but there was no room. And eventually I realized that hotel is just a restaurant, and for some reason they call it a hotel. But sometimes it would just be a restaurant, just an empty room with a few tables and a stove, but there'd be a huge sign that said hotel outside. And that was more common out where I was, out in the boondocks. Another one that I thought was really funny was I knew India was mostly a dry country, but when I was driving around, there were tons of saloons. And I kept seeing sign after sign for saloon when I was riding my bike around. And eventually I stopped and I looked in, but I didn't see anything, or a lot of them were empty during the day, but there were tons of signs for saloons. And it was a long time before I actually stumbled upon one that was in operation, and there was someone cutting someone's hair. And I was like, oh, that's weird. And then I saw it in another one, and I was like, oh, salon? That's what it is. It's a salon. It's a barber shop. But they spell it saloon with 2 O's, like an old-timey saloon that cowboys drink at. So what I thought were all these alcohol bars, that's the Chinese word, jioba, was actually just a whole bunch of barber shops. I needed some clothes while I was in India, and I didn't really want to go to any of the big shops because there were so many outdoor shops and farmers markets and everything, and I figured I could find someone selling t-shirts somewhere if I just kept riding my bike. And I did. All of a sudden there popped up like 50 shirts attached to this wire rack on the side of the highway, basically. And I just pulled over and started looking at them, and I bargained with the guy even because he spoke great English. But I bought a bunch of shirts. I got rid of pretty much all my shirts and bought 5 new ones. Oh, because I washed my shirts in the washing machine they got for the house, but the water is like red clay, so it stains all the white shirts. But all my shirts were dying anyway. So I was happy to replace them and get a new set. And I got 5 new shirts for like $2 each, and a couple of them are still going strong. They were good shirts. I was very happy to get them, and they were funny. My favorite one said Modify Unlimited Void. Just a yellow shirt with black writing, Modify Unlimited Void. And then there was some anime character I don't recognize at all, giving like a peace sign, or I guess it's a victory sign in Japan, on the back of the t-shirt. But Modify Unlimited Void is a pretty cool slogan. Modify Unlimited Void. What the heck does that mean? I got really excited when I saw this one poster. It was actually an advertisement, and I had to sloop my bicycle back around so I could check it out again. I was like, is that? And I swear it's an Indian Bradley Cooper. Like, it looked exactly like Bradley Cooper, but a little bit Indian. But way more Bradley Cooper than stereotypical Indian facial features. Like, he had the facial features of Bradley Cooper almost. It was very bizarre to see. And he was selling a suit or something in the advertisement. What else did I do? I had a bunch of free time, and I started sewing. They had these really intricate rugs and tapestries, and I noticed some of them were coming apart. So I actually sewed them together so that they were like new again. That was fun. I like repairing stuff. Oh, the shower curtain. So there was no curtain, but there was a large window, like a 5 foot by 3 foot window, a very large window in the wall of the bathroom. And I don't even think I noticed it the first couple days, but I looked out by the 3rd day and I realized I could see straight out into the parking structure next to my house that I rented. And there are parking attendants and like people there, and the cleaner lived in that area, so he mostly just hung around the parking structure all day, helping people park or whatever. And I was like, oh. So I contacted the host and asked him if he could put in a curtain over the window. And he was like, oh yeah, we can put in a curtain, but no one's gonna look. No worries. And I was like, oh no, I get it. I'd just rather not have it open, because I can just look over and there's people there and I'm showering. And he was like, yeah, no, I get it. Okay, we'll work something up and get back to you. And to his credit, the main guy I hung out with a lot came over, the sort of in-between guy, and he said, hey, so it's the shower? What's wrong with the bathroom? And I was like, oh, it's just I can see like Babu from here. Babu was the cleaner, like the parking attendant guy was saying. And I was like, I can see him from here, so, you know, if I can see him, he can see me, and the window's huge, so I'd rather just have a closed window. The window wasn't 5 by 3 feet, but it was like 2 by 2 feet. I don't know, but you could see right out of it and right into the bathroom through it. It was not a tiny window set up high. And he was like, oh yeah, I guess we can block the window, but nobody's gonna look in. And I was like, okay, thanks, I understand that, but I'd like to still block the window. Okay, I just checked because I couldn't remember the size of the window. I was right. It's like 3 by 5 feet. It was a big window. And so he agreed, and he put cardboard. He just taped cardboard around all the outside of the window so it was all closed up. And great, that works for me. And then when I was cooking one night, I looked to my left, and there's a bunch of giant windows in the house. So I looked out to my left, and I wasn't wearing my shirt. And I realized that also looks straight into the parking garage. And none of them were looking directly at me, but there were 4 guys standing there 20 feet away from me in the parking garage. And when I looked up at them, then one looked over at me and then looked back at the group and kept talking. And I was like, "Welp." And I started rearranging things and putting up blankets and curtains because I had noticed there were extra curtains in the cabinet. And yeah, like I said, I just like my own space. So I definitely started isolating direct lines of sight from the house. I didn't want people looking in on the house while I was in the house doing my thing. And I was only the second guest that had ever rented that house, so they had a ton of stuff to work out. Like, they didn't have the washing machine before I got there, but there's no laundromats where I was, like way out in the country. And I suggested that if he wanted to rent these to, especially Americans, which was his goal to rent to Western and American tourists, especially this far out of the city, there would have to be a washing machine in the room because this is a house. And just for me, I needed to wash my clothes. But if there was a family, they would need a washing machine to wash everything. And I showed him those split washing machines because those are like $30 now in Asia. And he got one and brought it in the next day, but the water was still really dirty. So they added a second filter. And then I had a washing machine, and it was fantastic. But they had to make a lot of improvements to the house to make it comfortable for Western travelers. So I was constantly going back and forth like, yeah, you'll have to block the bathroom windows so that people can't see directly into the bathroom. Westerners are pretty private. They're not going to like an open window that people can see inside, especially when people work there and are there all day. I found out that there was one decathlon in the state of Orissa, or at least in the city of Bhubaneswar, that sports clothing and sports equipment store I love. And it just happened to be only like a 30-minute bike ride from where I was. So I went there a few times and walked around. It was clear that they didn't sell a ton of stuff, and it was because it was priced at regular decathlon prices, which are not super cheap, and income's pretty low in India in general, like the average income. So it would be sort of a financial burden for most families to buy the quick dry pants that Decathlon sells, or a bicycle. But it was cool that the store was there and I got to walk around. I think I bought something at some point, but I was happy that one of my favorite stores was so close to me. And it was just a new part of the city I hadn't got to explore, or rather a new part of the countryside I hadn't really explored, because it was outside of the city a bit. Oh, if you go to India, though, I thought I was lucky because Durga Puja was starting up right like a couple weeks after I got there in August or September, something like that. And yeah, the end of September. So I was like, wow. But then I found out that they have holidays basically year round in India. But it was really cool because they put lights everywhere during Durga Puja. So super intricate light displays are put up on huge walls called pandals, and even on like set structures. Like they build the pandals and then take them all down after the holiday. But even like a huge government building will be very fancy, adorned with all these different lights. And it's really fun going from building to building and looking at them. So during Durga Puja, a bunch of families and tourists and everyone will just walk around looking at all the different light displays, and there's live music playing everywhere. It's a lot of fun. But I did stop looking at the pandals after I had seen 100 of them. I'll be honest. But walking around with the crowds of locals and Indian tourists, just enjoying the celebration, that was a lot of fun. That really cemented me again feeling at home in such a different country. Oh, one of my hosts who I hung out with a couple times, he always wanted to go for breakfast, and he spoke fluent English. But I had to explain to him like 10 times, no, I really don't eat breakfast. I really have a 1 meal a day thing. And I went out with him a couple times just because he was so like, oh, all right, are you ready for breakfast? And after like, no, I don't eat breakfast. I went out with him once, got the great food that I really loved. But I had to keep telling him that I don't eat breakfast. I usually just 1 meal a day in the evening. But the one time I did go with him to a very early breakfast, after the breakfast, he took me to a chai tea bar, and those are very popular in Bhubaneswar. And he asked for a specific cup. It's a red clay cup, because you can get a plastic cup or whatever, but he likes the red clay ones. And you can drink the chai tea out of a red clay-fired cup. And I don't really like chai tea. And it tasted so freaking good, even though it was like 80 degrees or whatever. It tasted great in this red cup. It was delicious, to be perfectly honest. And I was very happy to find chai tea in a way I could appreciate, because I never got it when I drank it in the States or tried it pretty much anywhere. But this chai tea was delicious. I really liked it. I even made it for myself a couple times at home. And that guy who introduced me to chai tea, B2, took me home to his house that he built. He was an architect. Also, Tanmaya, the other guy. Tanmaya was the guy who was helping me all the time. I finally found their names. But B2 invited me back, and me and Tanmaya and everybody, we all drank tea together and just had a nice chat for a couple hours. And it was and they told me they drank chai tea together every night, and that's basically how they spent every evening, which is a pretty cool ritual. A couple months in, though, when I was busy working on audio stuff, and I had a pretty set routine of waking up, working on stuff, going to exercise in the evening, getting dinner, and then going back and working on more audio stuff, there was a cyclone coming in, and it was a pretty big deal. Like, the entire town, the regular restaurants I went to, and all of my hosts, everybody kept telling me, be careful, cyclone's coming in, for like a week, 10 days before it actually arrived, as it was. I was consistently warned about the cyclone that was coming. And cyclone is like monsoon. They just use the word cyclone, in English anyway, to me. Just a big rainstorm coming in. And I wasn't too worried because I love rainstorms and I've lived in so many countries. I specifically moved to countries during the rainy season, during the monsoon season. So I was like, I totally understand. And also, I was in a giant concrete house with metal gates. Like, this is probably the most solid housing I had ever been in a rainstorm in. It was a very strong place, so I wasn't too worried about a monsoon arriving. And I would go out walking, and the housekeeper who he felt he was kind of responsible for me, I suppose. I would see him waiting, like tapping his foot basically outside the door when I came back home. So I just started staying out later and later, and because I was eating so much food anyway, because I love all of that food, as you can tell from Lessons from India too. So I was eating way more portions than I needed. So it wasn't hurting me to exercise more than I currently was. And I started going out later and later until it was getting close to midnight, and then he wasn't tapping his foot outside that monsoon week, or the leading up to a monsoon week. His name was Babu, by the way, the caretaker. Nice guy, great at cleaning, refused to use Google Translate, which I never quite understood. He was really keen on talking to me, but he always talked to me in Odia. And I would say, okay, and I would type something back to him. Can we use Google Translate so we can talk? And he would always say, no. And he never wanted to have a conversation, but he always, every day, every time he saw me, he would speak a fluent stream of Odia at me. And for the first 10 times I told him I couldn't understand, but he just kept speaking Odia. And I was like, okay. And I just started telling him I'm going to go once he started speaking Odia to me, because there's nothing I can do with that stream of unfamiliar language. And then the night before the cyclone was due to arrive, I was out cycling and I got a phone call from one of the hosts saying that caretaker, Babu, was very worried about me and I should come home immediately because the cyclone was coming. And I was very aware of this. I had satellite maps and I checked everything just because of what a big deal the whole town was making out of this cyclone. And I told them that I would be back soon. It's okay. I had been in plenty of countries and I wasn't going to stay out once the cyclone was actually arriving. And the owner of the house said, okay. And that kind of, from that point forward, I didn't get too much trouble from Babu. Like, he very much tried to mother hen me in a lot of ways, but after I disconnected the doorbell and then started having to just walk away from him talking at me since he refused to have any sort of conversation, and then this, where he waited outside of the gate to my house every day and walked in with me and then closed the door behind me. And so I had to start locking the outer gate so he couldn't do that. I felt bad every time I did it, but I had to establish boundaries because he did not get it and refused to communicate in Odia or English. But I did finally turn around and get back to my house at 1 a.m. or something that evening. Everybody was already asleep. And I went in and the map and the satellite thing said that in about 3 hours it was going to hit, like the cyclone was going to be at its strongest. And it had just started to drizzle and there were a few gusts of wind, but, you know, it wasn't a cyclone, it wasn't a monsoon or anything, which I was extremely excited for. I loved living in Laos because they have like an 8-month monsoon season. So do a lot of countries, actually. I'm surprised at how many countries have a longer rainy season than I knew. But I loved being in Laos because every day there'd be a torrential downpour in the place I was renting. And it was so much fun seeing these crazy rainstorms, especially with an open pavilion I could sit in and just gaze out dreamily at the rain, punishing the jungles, waiting to go get the homemade ice cream. Man, I gotta go back to Laos. They have good food and good ice cream. Anyway, India. You know what? There's no homemade ice cream in India. That, where I was anyway. That's interesting. They have such good dairy. I bet they'd have like the best ice cream. What was I talking about? Monsoon, cyclone. So I stayed up a couple more hours because I usually work during the night anyway, and there was still no cyclone activity, and every hour that passed, it added 1 more hour to the time that the cyclone was coming, so it was always 2 hours away or so. And I finally went to bed, and I woke up at, 10:30, 11 noon, something like that. And when I woke up, I checked my phone again, and it said that the cyclone had just hit its apotheosis, apex. Nadir's down. Apex, I guess. It's point of no return. That's not correct. It hit its fiery strong point, we'll say. And I was like, oh boy. And I jumped out of bed. I didn't hear the rainstorm outside, but this house had thick concrete walls, like 1.5 feet at least, probably 2 feet thick concrete walls. This was a sturdy home, so I usually didn't hear the weather outside anyway, unless the rain was like whipping sideways and hitting the window. But even the overhang on the window is like 2 feet. So yeah, I didn't think it was weird I couldn't hear anything. But I went up to the roof because I did have a roof patio. And I was like, oh boy. And I opened it up. And it was lightly raining. It was certainly more than sprinkling. But it was a heavy sprinkle is what I would call this cyclone. And I was kind of confused and taken aback, and I like checked the weather map and the satellite and I could see it. It was over me, but this cyclone just wasn't a very strong storm. It was some rain and really not even a noticeable amount of wind. Yeah, it was just it was normal rain. and not particularly heavy. But again, the whole town, like for days, for over a week, had been telling me they were going to close the shops and all this kind of stuff. So I stayed cautious for a couple more days. But for all 3 scheduled days of the cyclone, it sort of rained some of the days, and not the whole day. Maybe 3 hours out of each scheduled day where the cyclone was supposed to be raging, it just rained a little bit each day for a few hours, on and off. But the town did not open back up. Everybody who took their days off stayed closed for the whole 3 scheduled day of the cyclone. And I finally saw the host again the day after, or 2 days after, something like that, after the cyclone had passed, as it was. And I asked him, that was kind of odd. It seemed like everybody was really worried about the storm coming, including the weather service with all those texts. And then it just rained a couple hours each day. There wasn't a huge monsoon, and all the buildings, all the businesses closed in the whole town for all 3 days. I was surprised at what a reaction there was to this sort of what seemed like normal rainfall to me. And the host said, "Oh, yeah, it did the whole town kind of overreacted this storm, this cyclone. But it's because, well, have you ever heard of the Paradeep cyclone?" And I was like, "Nope." And he was like, "So that was a super cyclone in 1999. And he told me about that, and there was a huge super cyclone, a crazy monsoon. And the official count is 9,887 people. So just about 10,000 people died in Orissa when this super cyclone showed up in 1999 because they didn't have any emergency services for cyclones at all at the time. And there hadn't been a super cyclone that crazy in so long that they weren't prepared for it. And actually, one of these people I was hanging out with in the town fairly regularly, my host let me know that his family, he lost members of his direct family in that super cyclone. And with 10,000 people, he certainly wasn't the only person in town who had lost some people in the 99 super cyclone, because Bhubaneswar, the city, is the largest city in the state of Orissa in India. So there were tons of people in the town right outside where I was connected to people who had died within their lifetime by this super cyclone. So I understood why they made such a big deal out of it. And whenever there's any kind of cyclone, the host explained to me, everybody shuts down everything and battens the hatches, because that memory is still very alive 20, 25 years later. The people who went through that as adults are still slightly older adults who can remember how insane it was and how many people they knew died in the tragedy. So, in fact, so many people died. 10,000 is a lot of people for a single storm. So many people died, and so much property was destroyed, and so much society was destroyed in that super cyclone that the Indian government created, and the state of Orissa created, an emergency response unit. Up until 1999, they didn't have one to respond to storms. But after that super cyclone occurred, they decided to create an emergency response team. And my friend from that town was part of that team, and he actually helped create that team, and he helped rebuild the town after the 99 cyclone as a young man. So I understood after that why everybody was so worried about the cyclone, because, there wasn't text messages at the time, but the weather reports they did have indicated that it was another cyclone during the rainy season. What I had just been through, a rainy day, not much wind, and then it was gone. But in 1999, that's not what happened. The storm literally destroyed bridges, destroyed buildings, destroyed roads. Winds and rains just destroyed Orissa and killed, 10,000 people. So, I talked to my friend who I'd hung out a couple times about it, and he explained how it was for him, and it was just pretty crazy to learn about. But that's why they were so worried about it, even though the satellite this time, 25 years later after the tragedy, said that it wasn't going to be that strong. It was still technically a cyclone, a rainstorm, a monsoon. So everybody took it just as seriously as they had 25 years ago when nobody was prepared for the destructive environmental force brought upon them. And of course, everybody prays to their gods, and like I said, it's an extremely religious country, so the amount they pray and give offerings is believed to be directly proportional to the amount of divine devastation their community is dealt by gods and goddesses. But, I had been doing the prayers, the lighting the incense, and putting fresh flowers on that prayer shelf every single day. So I knew that's what everybody else was doing too, so I kind of was glad that I had taken part in this sort of communal method of confronting the anger of the gods. And it worked, because it was a light rain, and nobody got hurt or died. India is still largely a cash society, which was interesting to me because so many countries have moved beyond that. But India still had a lot of people using cash. There were probably more people using QR codes, but not as much as you see in Asian countries or something like that. It was probably more like the US, like a lot of people still used cash and it was very normal there. Whereas if you're in China or Korea and you use cash, it's kind of like, oh, look at this guy. Look at this old school cash fella. And it was hard to find a working ATM, but they have a billion ATMs. And I had to just ride my bike from ATM to ATM when I finally needed money. And I think the fifth one I found worked, and I was able to withdraw cash. So not many worked out where I was, but the fifth one worked, and there were probably 1,000 others in that city I could have tried. So maybe not every ATM works if you're visiting India, but don't worry, just keep trying them. One of them will certainly work. One is all you need. I learned so many cool things about India while I was there, but one that always stuck with me was that the word juggernaut, the English word juggernaut, comes from an Indian word, comes from the Indian god, Jagannath. And the place I was living in is near a town called Jagannathpur, and there's a ton of places called Jagannathpur because everything is named after a god in India. So many things are. So many temples, and Jagannath is this just big, beefy god, and all of his temples are super beefy, brutalist architecture, but nicely ornamented with the swirling Indian architecture that looks so cool on their temples. But I like that because I know the Juggernaut X-Men character, and that's just a very common word. It's used so often in descriptive stories or movies to describe some unrelenting, unstoppable force. And then I was in India talking to the genius student. Oh, that's what I should probably talk about next. And she explained to me that she was telling me about Jagannath, the god. And I was like, is that where the English word juggernaut? And she explained to me, yes, that's where juggernaut comes from. The god, the Indian god, Jagannath. So now you at least know one pretty important part of the Hindu religion, Jagannath, major god in Hinduism. Pretty easy to remember it because Juggernaut, the English word, and Jagannath, the Indian name of that god, pretty similar. Also, in the town I was in, all the old people, when they saw each other, instead of saying hello in Hindi or Odia, they usually said Jai Jagannath, which is like in Juggernaut's name or presence or something like that, like thanks to Jagannath. So that was pretty cool because I met her grandma and I got to say Jai Jagannath. And the grandma was like, what is this freaking weirdo talking about? Pretty cool. Pretty cool to learn. I love learning all those little things, just like every little puzzle piece that makes up a 10 million puzzle piece language or culture. Fascinating. Infinite puzzle pieces, and I'm still excited every time I get a glimpse at one of them. Which means I should probably bring up the student I keep referencing here and there, and the reason I keep bringing her up, her name is Shweta, is because she's literally a genius, and she taught me more in 30 minutes than I had learned over a month living in India and talking to even the fluent speakers. She just had so much knowledge. So I met Shweta because of her brother, actually. She had a little brother who was, 15, something like that. And he started talking to me while I was walking home one day, him and his dad. And they just wanted to practice English. I think his dad was actually physically like pushing him on the shoulder, talk to him. And after I talked to that kid for a while, I said, okay, bye, have a good night. I saw them again the next day, and he, the teenager who was talking to me, invited me over to meet his sister because when he told her about me, she wanted to meet me because there are no tourists in that part of India, literally none, that I saw the entire trip I was there. So they took me to these apartments that I hadn't been to before, and I saw them. They were right in the middle. They were the largest apartment structures, the only ones in the town. And he explained to me that his sister their parents had rented her a separate room because she was studying for the UPSC test. And he said that like it was something that I should know. And I was like, wow, cool. What is that? And he just told me that his sister would explain it. And so he introduced me, and then he and his dad sat down and just kind of, not quite chaperoned, but they were just in the room while this student, Shweta, talked to me in fluent English, like better English than many Americans I know. And she told me just her story, but some of the basics are that she was studying for the UPSC test at the time. She was going to take her second attempt at it, which is not crazy because the UPSC, after she explained it to me, and then after I looked it up myself at home to make sure, is crazy. So you have to know everything. You have to know every subject: engineering, geology, history, politics, everything. You just have to know everything. And then you have to read current events constantly to make sure you know all the new things that have happened and how they relate to all of the other knowledge that you are studying. And there are many very difficult tests around the world. I was in China. The Gaokao is often spoken of as the most difficult test in the world, but it is a little more focused. And just as an example, why I now consider the UPSC test to maybe be more difficult. The Gaokao, which is the exam Chinese high school students take to determine where they go for college, that has a pretty low passing rate. Up to like 9%, 10% of Chinese students pass it. So more than 90% fail that test every year. And it can be far lower, a fraction of a percent. And that test is 9 hours long. So that's a pretty long test, and that's a pretty low passing rate. And you do have to know a lot of subjects, and you do have to connect a lot of them, like this UPSC. But the UPSC is 31 hours plus an interview, which can be as long as they choose it to be. And of course, it's not just an apples to apples, like this is more hours, so it's more difficult. But I'm combining that 31 hours of testing with the 0.2% annual pass rate of the UPSC. 0.2%. That's right, 99.8% of the applicants for this test fail it every year. So you have to be in the top 0.2% just to be allowed to enter into the higher institutions of India, like the lawmakers, which is specifically what this student was going for. And I asked her about a bunch of stuff about India that I hadn't understood yet until that point. I hadn't gotten really good answers. And every time I asked her something, she just gave me an incredibly detailed yet as concise as possible answer, like she was answering an interviewer for one of these tests. And the quality and depth but brevity of the knowledge was shocking, every single answer. So we just had this really interesting conversation for an hour. and she showed me her notebooks that she would take notes on and try to connect the different ideas from engineering to politics, for example. And then she showed me her text. There was a huge bookshelf, floor to ceiling, and maybe 3 feet wide. And I was like, are these your textbooks? Because there's hundreds of books on this bookshelf. She's like, yep. So if I need to know something about agricultural farming 350 years ago, I'd get that book. And if I have to know something Biden did 2 weeks ago, and I have this archive of newspapers on my laptop that I read through and try to connect that. And it was a boggling explanation of a test. And as far as I can look it up, that is what it is. It's especially for what she's going for. She wants to become a lawmaker. And for that, you apparently have to know everything and keep up on everything to pass this test. And it's a 4-hour preliminary exam. And then you have 9 3-hour essays to complete. And then you have a personal interview with a panel of judges or interviewers. And that's what she was preparing for. And I was like, ugh, I spent 90 minutes on the SATs and I hated it. Or I don't even know what the SATs is, 3 hours, whatever. It sucked. But she's doing 10 times that, because what was really important to this student was becoming a lawmaker because she wanted to do away with the caste system. And that was really interesting to me, because the hosts, the Airbnb hosts that I talked to, and most people I talked to, when I would ask about the caste system, they said, it's still here, but it's not very important because everybody can go to school now. Things are much more equal than they used to be before. But I was sort of like, well, you have a house and other people don't have a house. So I wasn't sure how equitable everything really was. Not only have a house, my host was able to build a house just so he could rent it out to tourists. But it was very obvious that other people in that region did not have that type of property or financial capacity. And the teenager, her little brother, and then her asked me the name of the guy whose house I was renting, and I told them. And she was like, yeah, and they were both like, oh, okay, sure, because everyone knows him, because he's part of the highest caste. He's a Brahmin. And that's sort of the aristocracy of India. And as far as Shweta explained it, which I totally believe this is true, it still pretty much determines everything. Caste is extremely important. She is not a Brahmin. Her family is Karim, or Karim, I don't know how to say it. So she's in the academic class, more like. So she can advance high, she can even become a lawmaker, but there are positions within India that she cannot hold because of the caste she was born into. The people who are taking care of my house, they're probably part of the untouchable caste or one of the lower castes. And she was very honest with her answers about the caste system, I think in particular because she wants to change it. She wants to make things more equitable so that everyone would be able to serve their country or pursue an occupation that they choose so long as they educated themselves, so that there would be a more equitable access of opportunity, which, as she explained it to me, and as it appeared to be when I was there, and what I understand of Indian society after I read about it from what she explained, it does seem to very much be determined by the caste system, and you are allowed to hold jobs based on what caste, what level of Indian society you were born into. You're allowed to own property depending on what level of Indian society you're born into. You can't own too much if you're not part of the highest caste. And there are a few aspiring members of parliament who are the people in India who make the laws who are trying to change that and get more equity in society in general among castes. But that is an old country, and they've had castes forever, and they still have them. So it's not easy to do, but this student wants to become part of that effort to make sure that if you work hard enough and you can educate yourself, then you can have access to higher levels of society and make a better life for yourself. very noble pursuit. So we probably talked for an hour or something like that. After an hour or so, just from all the stuff she was telling me, I was like, are you okay talking for this long? Do you have to get back to studying? Because from what you're telling me, it seems like you just have to constantly study until you take it again in 5 months or whatever it is. And she says, no, it's okay. This is a good break. I'll take a break from this, and this will be like my little study break, and then I'll get back to it whenever you're done, but there's no rush or anything. But what has been going on is she's explaining to me all these very intricate political realities of India for an hour. So I was like, this is her break when she gets to teach basically very difficult concepts for an hour. But it did seem like she was enjoying it, and I was certainly a fascinated, rapt audience. I love learning about all this stuff, especially from someone so knowledgeable and able to convey that knowledge in a way, in a second language, no less, that I understood. Not that you would even be able to tell. Like, I guess she had an accent, maybe? I can't even remember her really having an accent, just like fluent English. And she was early 20s. I think she was 25, 23, something like that. Incredibly impressive student, and it was an amazing conversation. And Deepavali was coming up, or Diwali. The word for the holiday in India is Deepavali. So a little after I asked if I was in her way of studying, basically, I sort of excused myself, and it had been a while. And I left the apartment and thanked her for the talk, and she said it was great. And she and her brother invited me over to their house for Deepavali. And that gave me a bit of social anxiety, because again, I couldn't speak more than 2 words of any Indian language, but she could translate she'd at least be able to explain to me what to do, I figured, when I arrived at their house. And every Indian is so welcoming. Everybody was so kind to me the whole time I was in India. And so I wasn't as worried as I normally would have been. And I said I would think on it because it was like a couple days out, or maybe it was the next day. It was soon. And I did decide to go to their house for Deepavali because I was like, you're in India. You just made friends with a genius Indian who speaks fluent English and can navigate you through these thousands of year-old traditions and explain to you what's going on. Like, you're not going to have a better opportunity to learn in a more local locale than this, in a more Indian location. Like, you're in India for Deepavali, for Diwali. You should go. And so I mustered up my courage and sent over a message, and she sent her brother out on his bicycle to come to my place, and then I followed him on my bicycle, and we went to their family home. And I had a pretty cool Deepavali time. They gave me these great little cookies that I mentioned in part 2 of Lessons from India. Just delicious little cookies with nougat inside, and it's like a traditional dessert that they bake for Deepavali. And that's where I learned Jai Jagannath. Got to say it to a grandma, and I went up on the roof with them afterward, and they shot off fireworks. And again, I was in someone else's home, which I had been a few times, and it was super, super clean. And India's a dry place, dust kicks up. I would think things would be more dirty when they're living on a dirt road. And it just wasn't. They clearly took immaculate care of their home, and everyone's always cleaning. So it was a very comfortable stay. We had tea and cookies, and their relatives asked me a few questions. But mostly it was me and Shweta, and I just got to keep asking her more questions about the caste system and the UPSC exam and all the other things I just wanted a deeper understanding of. And she, again, was just able to answer everything so easily. It was clear she had so much information in her head that everything was just right at the top, just brimming. It was another amazing conversation. And then she and her brother took me up to the roof, and we all shot off some fireworks. And then I went home, and it was really fun. And I asked about how the lamps function for Deepavali, and Shweta explained generally how they work, that it's sort of a triumph of light over dark, and you light a oil lamp at sundown, and then in ancient times, you're supposed to keep the lamp lit until the sun rises again. So that light is enduring until the sunrise comes the next day. And I had an idea that I decided to do once Shweta explained it so clearly to me. That's how I understood from reading Wikipedia and stuff. But when she explained to me that is what it is, and that every family would do it similar, but they all had their own family traditions, of course, and they'd stand around and sing. I didn't get to see them sing, which I bet would have been great, but I did see 1,000 other people sing every day when I was riding around, so it's okay. And I had seen some of the diyas. So a diya looks like Aladdin's lamp with the top lid taken off, and it's just this little piece of pottery, all the common ones, and you put oil in it, and then you put in a wick. You light the wick, and it'll use the oil from inside the diya lamp until all the oil's used up. And that's, the lamp you use. You light it at sunset, and then you have to keep it lit until sunrise. Most people light them and then go to bed, but I have a lot of free time. I'm up most of the night anyway, and so I decided that I would just stay up the entire night, and I'd go get 4 diyas, and since I had that roof patio, I would put one on each corner of the roof at sunset. And I left Shweta's family's house right when the sun was almost, right after sunset, so there were still some rays of light in the sky. And I made it home and got the 4 diyas that I had bought from the side of the road with the castor oil, I believe. And I put one on each corner of the roof patio, and then I lit each of the lamps, and I checked on them every 20 minutes. And in Zelda, when you light torches, it'll go doodaloo, 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 when you light all 3 of them, let's say, and then you unlock a whatever. And so I was running from corner of the roof patio, lighting a lamp and going doodaloo, and then I'd run to the next one, doodaloo, doodaloo, and then when I lit the 4th one, doodaloo, and all 4 were lighting, and it just was really cool because I did feel like I was taking part in this thousands of year old tradition with the traditional ornaments and instruments I was supposed to be using. And it was really fun to do. I don't push myself a lot, so here I was pushing myself to stay up the entire night and make sure these lamps were lit. Sometimes 3 of them would be out, and I'd be like, and I'd run across and light everything again and make sure it was all going, because it's windy on the roof. And after, I think I made it I had this all planned out already, so I think it was halfway through the night, I took one of the lamps down into the house and put them on this metal platter and put down one, and it was lit. And it was really cool because I turned off all the lights in the house, so when I brought in the lamp that was still aflame, there was a little bit of light, and I opened all the doors to the house so that the light could reach into every room from the central table in the dining room or living room. And there was just a little bit. There was just a little orange glow, and it didn't go everywhere. And then I waited 1 hour, and when it was 1 p.m., I went up and I took another one, or 2 p.m., whatever it was, and I took the second lamp down and arranged it in a yin-yang fashion to the other one, so it looked cool. And then there was twice as much light, and it was still pretty dim. And then an hour later, I took the 3rd one, then on the 4th hour, I took the last one in from the roof and put it with the other 3, and now I had these 4 diya arranged in a central location, and now you could really see there was the light from the candles going into every single room because all of the doors were open. Yeah, the light was taking up the whole house. It was lighting the house. It was keeping the darkness at bay. And the tradition of it was very satisfying. I understood how that could become the tradition to do for this holiday. And I refilled all of the lamps again with the rest of the castor oil that I had. And by that time it was 4:30 a.m. or so. So I only needed them to stay lit for another hour. And they were inside now, so the wind wasn't constantly trying to blow them out. And it was just awesome. It worked. The lamp stayed lit for the next hour. And then when I looked outside, I was checking outside like every 10 minutes. And then finally, when I looked out one of those times, the sun was rising, and my lamps had made it. So I let them burn out after the sun had risen. But I mean, that's one of the oldest holidays I know about, in one of the oldest countries I know about, in one of the strongest monocultural countries that I know about, which I don't like if I have to live in it, but to visit it, it just means I get an extremely undiluted dose of the culture by taking part in this tradition, and especially doing it the old way. I actually stayed up with the lamps and kept them lit the entire night. So that was this cool little personal trial and a move to make myself closer to the Indian culture in general, and just take part in this tradition that I knew almost everybody in the country was taking part in. It was pretty cool. And I went out and I saw a couple people lighting diyas also outside. That was a pretty meaningful experience. It was really cool having the diyas when I brought them inside also, inside the house from the roof. And they were lighting up and sending rays of light by lamplight into every room in the house. Because someone had told me, I think it was Shweta, that the light has to reach everywhere in the house. So I made sure that all of the doors were open and that the lamps were in a central location, so at least some light was in every room. All the sewing shops are called ladies' shops, and there's ladies working there. So I was looking around for needles so I could sew my sandals or my shirt. I can't remember what it was. But I couldn't find needles anywhere in all of the other little normal convenient shops or anything, convenience stores, or just little craft shops or hardware or anything. Nobody had needles. And then I asked one shop owner, and he said, "Oh, it's for ladies. You need the ladies' shop." And I had seen these ladies' shops around, but I didn't know what they were. And I didn't want to go in because India is also very gendered, so I didn't know if it was specifically only for ladies, like if men aren't supposed to go inside. But the guy told me that's just the name. You can go inside if you have something that you want to buy, or you're looking for something. And I went to a ladies' corner. That's the other thing they're called, ladies' shop or ladies' corner. And they had a whole bunch of needles, and they gave me some, and I gave them a few rupees, and it was great. Because then I could sew my sandals. Oh, one of the craziest things that happened to me was that I woke up to this insane rapping on my window, like crack, 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 tack, tack, tack. And I was like, oh, geez, because I figured the caretaker was just trying to get into the house again, and somehow he climbed over the wall to get to me. But then I stumbled out of bed, because if he was going that frantically tapping on my glass, I figured it was some kind of emergency, at least to him. So I rolled out of bed and I opened the curtain just in time to see this bird slamming his beak into the window. Crack, crack, crack. And then he looked up, saw me, cocked his head, and then hopped around and flew away. And I was like, what the fuck? And I went back to bed. And from that day forth, for the next 6 weeks, whatever, that I remained in India, every few hours, at most, I'd hear crack, 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 tack, 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 to the point I thought he was going to break the windows. And it was only the windows that were covered. And as soon as he saw me, he would look up, cock his head, like he was seeing me, and then fly away. But if I didn't open the curtain, he would go, tack, 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 on whatever window it was. And like I said, it was always behind a curtain. So if he could see me, he wouldn't do it, but he would crack against the windows. And I really thought they were going to break sometimes. They were loud, heavy taps. And often I was working on audio stuff, so I'd have to get up, open it, look at him. So he'd look up at me, cock his head, and then fly away. And a couple times there was more than one. So there was like, and And I went over to the kitchen window and pulled aside the curtain. There were two of them, crack, crack, crack. And most times when I opened it, they flew away, and those two at the kitchen did. But a couple times I'd opened the curtain, and I don't know if I was just at the wrong angle or what, but it's like he didn't even see me. And I just watched this bird jump up, flap his wings like 3 times so he was at the top of the window, and then tack, 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 smack it with his head and peck at it as he fell down to the windowsill. And then he'd flap a couple times to the top and pat, 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 flap a couple times, back, back, back. And it was crazy to watch this bird smashing his beak into the window over and over. I was worried he was going to get hurt or break the window. The window pane was rattling in its frame when he hit it. Doesn't look like either one ever happened. That bird always looked fine, and he came back. He did it all the time. But whenever he did see me, yeah, he'd look at me, be like, oh. Every time he looked at me like that, it was like he was like, well, that's not what I was expecting. Then he'd fly away. And from like the first time he did that and then flew away, or she, I was wondering, what were you expecting, bird? And it happened multiple times a day for a very long time. Yeah, it was so weird. I was like, does he have a nest in here? But there's no attic. And there's no nest on top of the roof, and there's no hidden alcoves inside the house. There's definitely no nest inside that he was trying to get to. So I don't know, maybe they left the windows open and that bird went in there and just liked to hang out in there. Or maybe he was just friends with the people in the house and he likes to play hide and seek, or like just wanted some recognition. It was so weird. But I had this crazy bird cracking its beak against the window multiple times a day for a very long time while I was in India. Never encountered that before or since, and I'm hoping one day I'll stumble across whatever the heck it meant. I kind of got into incense in India because I had to light incense every day for the prayers anyway, like the house prayers. And since I had to light incense anyway, I figured I would try a whole bunch of different kinds, and I got a whole bunch. And the one that I liked best was called Woods. And I was like, great. And it was a nice incense, so yeah, it was nice living in an incensey house again. Pretty hippie again, getting real hippie again. But it wouldn't be hippie in India because it's all incenses everywhere. I also lit incense cones for the first time, which I don't know if I ever have before or seen before even. Oh, I was walking by this one wedding that was playing what sounded like super modern hip hop and rap, but it was all in Indian. So there was this interesting Indian classic instrumental music underneath all of the modern hip hop rapping. And I really like the combination of like American hip hop mixed with Indian instruments. I love Indian music too. I could just listen to any kind of Indian music pretty much constantly. It was always fun to listen to in the restaurants. Like, and I'm bringing that up because, like, if I'm in China, I don't really like listening to a lot of Chinese music. It just sounds like the poppiest American music translated into Chinese. It's not particularly unique pop music anyway, or modern Chinese music. If you heard modern Chinese music and they were singing in English instead of Chinese, there would be no difference between modern American pop and modern Chinese pop. Not so with Indian music. But I heard all kinds of modern and traditional Indian music, and it sounds distinctly culturally Indian, like they use their instruments even in modern music. And yeah, it sounds really cool. Now that I'm not in India, when I do walk by an Indian restaurant and they're playing Indian music, I'm definitely like grooving out to the chimes and tamarines and zitars. Much more than I was before, because now it's kind of in my bones. Because there's music constantly from sunup to sundown and sometimes through the night in India. There's just always music of some kind playing somewhere. In front of the temples, or there's a live concert going on, or someone's playing a boombox, or like I said, there's a bunch of weddings, so they're playing music. There's just music and dancing everywhere in India, which I heartily enjoy. Oh, it's the craziest thing though? Like, they all work, all of the Indians, especially in those small towns. There's not a lot of money, so if they start a business, they have to work at that business very hard. So I did like going to the restaurants as much because the food was cheap as because every time I bought it, they were like so excited that someone was coming by to buy the food. They were like, "You really like it? It's good?" And there was one guy who made the chicken lollipops I mentioned in India too. They're just like chicken drumsticks that you can hold by the bone. They scrape the meat to the top, and then there's this delicious red chili sauce. But the guy that owned the restaurant, he was so proud, and he could speak decent enough English, definitely conversational. And he was telling me all about the history of his shop. He opened it a few years ago, and he was so proud because he had a certificate of hygiene and like well organized whatever for his restaurant, official from the government, and he showed that off to me. And yeah, he was just so excited about his restaurant, and he was going on. He was like, "I've been dreaming of opening a restaurant so long. I love making this food, and I finally did it a couple years ago." And I was like, "Man, that's great. I don't save a lot of money, and I just wanted to travel, so I kind of did that too. I'm excited to just be traveling right now, and so that I get to like meet you and listen to these kinds of stories. They're amazing and very inspiring for me." And he was like, "Yes, it's so good to travel and meet people. How old are you?" And I said, "Oh, I'm 37, whatever I was." And he said, "Oh, I'm 5 years younger than you. Huh." And I said, "You're 32. And he goes, "Yeah, 32. I was like, "Wow." And what I said was, "And you've already opened this shop. Great work." But what I was thinking was, "You look 55. I straight up thought this guy was like 50 years old, and he was way closer to 30. So a lot of these people must have very difficult lives because his teeth were rough, his hair was rough, his skin was rough. He definitely could be mistaken for a 50-year-old man real easy. When he told me he was 5 years younger than me, 32 years old, I stopped my jaw from dropping, basically. And just again, was extremely grateful that I was lucky enough to be born in a country where I fluently speak English, and I just happened to notice this ad and got to start teaching English. Like, what if I had to grow up and do whatever he did? He had 2 jobs, too. He opened his own restaurant, but he still worked at this hotel half the time. And he was, like, a super happy, super cool guy. He had a huge family. He already had 3 kids. They had a nice house. It's just so many Indians there have to work day in and day out, and it appears to be very hard on some of their bodies. Although I was also wondering, is that because of him eating meat and everybody else being a vegetarian? Because a lot of other older Indians had very smooth skin. I don't know, or maybe he just looked different than other people. I don't know, but whatever. He was an awesome guy, and I went to his restaurant whenever he was open. I did, but he was always working, so it was open at sporadic hours. I probably tried to go to his restaurant more times than I went to his restaurant and it was actually open. But whenever it was open, I stopped in and we talked for a while, and we seemed to have a lot in common, just like in our souls. Like fundamentally, we had similar values, even though we had totally different lives. We just got along very easily and were able to talk very easily. So I hope he's doing good. That's the restaurant Red Chili in Atala, in Bhubaneswar, in India. Actually, the day before I left, he said he was going to start opening the restaurant more regularly, or like the week before I left or something. But whenever I did go, there were a bunch of other people in there, so his food was obviously good and liked by the locals, so he probably is still doing good. Hope so. Few other things I jotted down here. Bangalore has cherry blossoms, which I just didn't think... Every country has cherry blossom trees, and I never made the connection before I went to Japan that cherry blossoms in other countries blossomed in spring. But anyway, I was talking to one of my friends, and I was mentioning going to Japan for the cherry blossom season, and he said, "Oh, you have to go to Bangalore. It's very famous for having cherry blossoms." So apparently Bangalore is, yeah, super famous for cherry blossoms also, and they have a whole cherry blossom season thing. I didn't get down there. I was in the far north, and I had already been there 3 months, and 3 months is about as long as I like to stay in a place before I discover the next place. And I mean, the other thing was people told me to go to other places constantly. And I really like to land in one place and walk around every day and discover new things about the town. And I could walk around one town for 3 months. It's fascinating to me. There's so much to learn culturally and architecturally just in one place that it's easy for me to spend a pretty long time in one place. And I just kept getting recommendations of where to go in India, and everything sounded really cool. But one that kept getting recommended to me over and over and over was Jammu and Kashmir. Everyone told me that. Shweta, the genius student, her brother, all of my hosts, the red chili guy, everybody who recommended travel would give me a couple places, but they'd also, almost everybody would say, and Jammu and Kashmir is the prettiest part of India. It's so beautiful. And every time someone recommended it to me, I'd say, okay, you know what, cool, that sounds good. I will go. I like mountains and all that. And as soon as I would say that, I was used to the response after like the 5th person. Go to Jammu and Kashmir. Okay, I'll go. And then, no, don't go now. There was just an election. It's a little not safe right now. So apparently there was a bunch of people angry at the government because they thought the elections were bullshit, or they wanted to separate and leave something. I'm not exactly sure what's going on. The genius explained it to me, but she explained so many things to me that I don't think I cataloged that one correctly. I know Kashmir borders Pakistan, and that's violent conflicts erupt between India and Pakistan regularly. But it also borders China, and that's not very relaxing either. And then Jammu and Kashmir is pretty a Muslim majority state, and that causes trouble with the Indian government because the rest of the country is Hindu. There's just a lot of social and civil, not quite unrest, but simmering going on all the time. And then plus with Pakistan bordering it, and there's a lot to consider. So there's not one main thing. It's just there's a lot going on. So I would always agree, because it does sound like a cool place to visit. And it seems safe enough for tourists, but everyone's like, probably not right now. Maybe go next year or in a couple years or something. I'll look back into it. It sounds good. It looks safe now. There's no travel advisories. It says tourists are welcome. There's just that same simmering civil unrest sort of for Muslims because they're afraid of being persecuted by the majority Hindu population and the Hindu government in charge. Oh, something crazy happened to me. I was riding back home one night, and I saw this weird, a shape I didn't quite recognize, but my brain was like, nope, wrong. And so I veered my bike widely around it, and as I did, it whipped up, and I realized it was a cobra. At least as far as I could see. I was riding past it on a bike, so I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure what looked like a weird stick or something whipped up in the air, and it had a club on the end of it. So I think I saw a cobra, and cobras are very common in India and the state I was in as well, in Odisha. So it would not have been weird at all to see a cobra. And like I said, they don't cultivate monocultures on the sides of the roads, so that's just wild grass. So pretty sure I did get to see a cobra in India, which was pretty cool and pretty wild, but I didn't stop. And I don't think I think I just like froze and let the bike take me past it and then kept pedaling again. But it was pretty big snake. Because when it whipped up, it was like 2.5 feet up. So its body must have been, 5 or 6 feet long, or maybe longer. I have no idea. It moved so weird, though. I've never seen in real life a snake whip up like that, except in Morocco during a show. And just that movement of whipping its head up to striking position, that just clicked in me, that memory. And I was like, pretty sure that was a cobra. And since I'm on snakes, almost the day before I left, I was walking back home with one of the hosts, and he like jumped back 5 feet, and there's this little snake, maybe 2.5 feet, something like that, not super long, winding its way across the porch. And I'm fine with snakes, and I don't think this one was dangerous because it had the smooth head. It didn't have a big diamond head. But there are a lot of poisonous snakes in India, so I can understand why my host reacted the way he did. And we just watched it sort of slither its way across the patio, and it slithered straight off the front steps and down into this yellow bucket. And so I just picked up the yellow bucket and poured the snake out into the grass. I did it in the garden of the house, though, because I wasn't worried about that snake. And the host looked at me, he's like, "Where'd it go?" And I was like, "I don't know, it slithered off into the garden." And then I was like, oh, I probably should put it outside the house, like estate, since he's clearly so freaked out about the snake. But I didn't, because I was thinking of the snake's welfare more than the human's welfare. Whoops. Okay, and the last thing I want to talk about, because this was bonkers, betel nut. Chewing betel nut is very popular all across Asia. You'll see people sitting on the side of the road, and there's like what looks almost like a tiny half cigarettes, like tiny half green leaf cigarettes. That's what they look like. And what they are is a leaf wrapped around a betel nut, which is like this orange fleshed nut, and some spices. And you take that little bundle and you'll pay, it's like nothing. It costs 1 rupee for 1 piece, which is like 1 cent. It's very cheap for these things all across Asia. So you see a lot of poor people chewing these all day. And I was never sure why. And I asked about them when I was in Thailand, because it's very popular there and in Vietnam. And I was always told, like, it's just fun to chew, so they don't have a lot to do all day when they're not farming, so a lot of them chew this betel nut, but it's not very healthy. And that's all I knew about these chewing betel nuts. But the genius student, her grandma actually makes those little bundles of leaves and betel nut. And she said that her grandma wanted to give me one so I could try it, because it was one of her grandma's favorite things to do, chew betel nut. And I said, thank you. And I went home, and I was walking around my house because I was playing that walking game. So I had to like get a few more steps in. So I was walking around my dining room and living room, and I was like, oh yeah, I have that betel nut. And I popped the little parcel in my mouth and chewed it up. And it doesn't taste great. It doesn't taste foul. It just tastes like you're chewing a leaf and a bunch of crunchy sticks. It just tastes like you're chewing vegetation. And I know that you're not supposed to swallow the juice, so I didn't swallow the juice as I was chewing up the betel nut and the vegetation. You just chew it and spit out the orange juice. And so I chewed it for a while, and I was like, okay, I don't really get why people like this so much, but it's not bad. Okay, whatever. Maybe it's just a snack. And I spit out the orange juice, and I kept walking, and then I was like, yeah, why do people like... And then my head tilted to the side, and I was like, whoa, what was that? And then I moved my head around, and everything got wavy. And I was like, ooh, is this the betel nut? And then I got pretty high a few seconds later, and I was just like willowy prancing around these 2 rooms getting my steps in. But I was like, yes, I am pretty high. I am as high as a kite can be indoors. And I was just floating. My head was bobbing and weaving. And I was like, okay, I see why people like this now. And I looked it up. Betel nut is psychoactive. So all these people that I've seen for years chewing this orange betel nut bundles, they're just getting high all day. They're tripping all day, basically. And I was like, okay, I get it. Yeah, I get it now why people like this. It's pretty fun. But I didn't do any more because it wasn't that fun and it didn't taste great. And when I have a lot of projects to work on, I'm not super into drinking or doing drugs. And this drug was pretty potent. But I would say it wore off pretty quick afterward. Oh, like a few hours. It actually lingered for a while. But if you're curious and you see a grandma with a whole table of these little green wrapped leaf bundles in front, I'd say it's worth trying if you have nothing to do and you're not driving any heavy machinery. Take a couple and go to a park and just, go have a mini trip for a while. You don't get as high as you would on mushrooms or like a regular dose of mushrooms or something. It's just this pretty intense, no, not even intense. What I'd call it a buzzing body high. It's like below an intense body high, but it's certainly recognizable and real. So it's pretty fun to do, feels good, and you can get real local. Those are my lessons from India. Thank you so much for listening. You can contact me at bitofarambler@gmail.com or bitofarambler on all the socials. And I'll talk to you soon about something else I thought was cool.